with one last look at the 2025 class. All right. So about 11 months ago, we did our first mock draft for the 2025 draft cycle. And want to go through the exercise of comparing that mock draft to what actually transpired in the 2025 NFL draft. As you can see, we had Kelvin Banks going first overall. Of course, the Panthers ultimately, they ended up selecting T-Mac, receiver out of Arizona, a bit later. You can see that we have him 11th overall going to Mr. Seapraski's Seahawks. What was the thought process? As you recall, what was your thought process here at the very top? They didn't go tackle. In fact, they drafted a receiver, and then they went fairly heavily on the defensive side of the ball, which made perfect sense. They were a historically bad defense a season ago.
Before the season started, we got to say that first, man. For anybody that's coming in now, this is not our last mock draft for the season. This is our first one.
Way too early.
Way too early, right? So, Kevin Banks going top of the board. I think he came in on all of our boards as the number one tackle going into the season. You said Carolina. We weren't sure about that offensive line. Wanted to protect Bryce Young. So, we selected Kevin Banks there at the top.
The things you want for your quarterback, bro, is weapons and protection, right? Icky was iffy. You know what I'm saying?
Icky was iffy.
You know what I'm saying? So we was looking for more of a sure thing, right? And obviously he was tackle one for us going into the college football season.
Banks obviously goes top 10 when it's all said and done here. After all of the season and then the prognostication, well, he's a little heavy-footed. Maybe we should kick him inside, whatever the case may be. He ends up going, I think, 9th overall to the Saints. So not a huge disparity. I think the name that you won't see in this mock draft that really shot up the board and really helped himself among the tackles was Armand Membo. Membo just, I mean, again, you talk about what a difference a year can make. Some of the best tape, if not the best tape among the tackles. So obviously when we talk about the draft, it's a projection, right? Will Campbell ultimately went 4th overall. We have him 4th overall going to the Commanders here. He ultimately goes 4th overall, right, to the Patriots, who obviously have needs along their offensive line as well. But not as much as Membo, Mr. Seapraski. I get you. I hear you on the Zabel. I don't think we had Zabel yet. I think Headley introduced us to him a little bit later in the season. But as far as just completely off the radar, and then relative to where they were selected in the 2025 NFL draft, absolutely Armand Membo among the tackles for sure. We had Luther Burden, and he was a very polarizing prospect, particularly throughout the process. I think obviously at this point, he was clearly in that conversation in terms of who's going to be the top receiver. Was it going to be McMillan out of Arizona, or was it going to be Luther Burden out of Missouri? Did not have the type of season he did in 2023. Of course, he put up insane numbers in 2023. Ultimately, he falls into day 2. But I really like the landing spot. In Chicago, new head coach, weapons for Caleb Williams. I think that's going to be a really good offense now that there's going to be some legitimate coaching happening there in Chicago. So Luther Burden, I'm anticipating the St. Brown treatment, right? That's kind of my thought process there.
You heard the coach. The coach came out. It was saying something about Burden. That he's not on the field. He's always in the training room. So that's something, a storyline we have to watch with Luther Burden. Hopefully he gets healthy, gets out there practicing. But if he can't be St. Brown if he's always in the training room. St. Brown's a tough football player. So we'll see on Luther Burden. But I do like the landing spot, like you said, with Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze, and DJ Moore, man. So I do like where he landed in Chicago.
The actual 2nd overall pick went 3rd here in our way too early 2025 NFL mock draft. Travis Hunter landing with the Broncos. Of course, he goes to Jacksonville. I think it's going to play out how we discussed. We discussed that ad nauseum throughout the 2025 draft cycle. I want to see him at corner. I want to see him at receiver. It's harder to find good quality corners, right? But he's just too gifted in terms of his ability to track and come down with the football, to not leverage him on the offensive side of the ball. So again, as I see it, I'm anticipating hopefully Jacksonville executes. I expect Hunter to play the majority of his snaps on the defensive side of the ball. I think there'll be a package for him, situational football on the offensive side of the ball. The good news, they got Brian Thomas Jr., right? So it's not as if they're hurting for a number one per se. You can continue to develop Travis Hunter in terms of being a better route runner, more effective tactician on that side of the ball, but definitely a role for him. He goes in the top 3 here. Ultimately, he was picked 2nd overall with Jacksonville trading up. The Broncos actually selected, who was it? It was Barron, was it not? It was Jahdae Barron out of Texas. So they did go DB here. We did get that part right. Of course, Denver obviously had a much better season than we anticipated. What are your thoughts on the Barron selection relative to our decision here to take Hunter, Drew?
I mean, we know something, bro. What you mean? Like,
that's what I want to hear, bro. That's what I want to hear, bro.
Like we
that's what I'm trying to hear,
bro. I mean, we gonna go through this. We gonna go through this mock draft here, and people are gonna realize, bro, they gotta come over to CPGM, Couch Potato General Manager, bro. We be on it early because there's some players in this particular mock draft that
nobody had in the first round.
Nobody had in the first round. You know what I'm saying? Then you had the ninjas watching from the dark with the lights off. You know what I'm saying? In the corner, stoked up. You know how the ninjas do, bro? They be stoked up in the, you know what I'm saying, in the corner, bro. Watching, bro. You know what I'm saying? And they go to X and whatever else, and they talk about the player. They've newly discovered this player, whatever. But yeah, man. I mean, he was the top corner in the draft. He's been the top corner. I think it was kind of him and Will Johnson in the very beginning, kind of going back and forth. And obviously, Will Johnson gets hurt, and then is he a zone corner only type of thing? And then Travis Hunter, it ended up being Travis Hunter as the best corner, and he's gonna play receiver, I guess, over there for Jacksonville, right? That's word on the street. He's out there making some outstanding catches too. I've seen some stuff on X, but yeah, man. But again, the Broncos got the consolation prize in Jahdae Barron, where he's a guy who just finds the football, bro. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. He's where he's supposed to be, and sometimes he's where he's not supposed to be, but it works out, bro. And so yeah, bro.
Yeah, I think, as we evaluated him, he played on the boundary this past season and he had a terrific year, but we kind of saw him more as a nickel safety type of hybrid, which is invaluable as far as I'm concerned. In NFL defenses, considering the proliferation of 11 personnel, 3 receiver sets, I think you got to have that nickel. You got to have that safety who can cover the slot and be, a quality run defender. And Barron checks the box. He gets his hands on the football as well. So I think it worked out well. And of course, as I mentioned, we nailed the fact that they not necessarily needed to, but did address the defensive backfield, despite the fact that they were a really good defense, a young defense as well. Looking forward to seeing more of that Broncos defense this upcoming season. We got the right player here in terms of Will Campbell, 4th overall. He ultimately goes 4th overall to the New England Patriots. The second tackle off the board in this particular mock draft about 11 months ago, but the first tackle in reality off the board to the Pats. The Commanders took Josh Connolly at the end of the first round. So again, obviously different expectations. Again, I Drew, maybe Drew knew something. Or no, it was Headley. Somebody knew something about Jaden Daniels. What? It might have been both of y'all. Because I think Drew had Jaden Daniels as the dark horse for the Heisman, right?
Yeah.
And then in terms of your evaluation, Headley, you actually had him higher than Drew and I did. So I think you guys both knew something about Jaden Daniels. Of course, the Commanders make it to the NFC Championship, so they're not in position to take Will Campbell, but they get Josh Connolly later. So again, right position here. What are your thoughts about both those players, frankly?
Will Campbell, I thought the tape was a little inconsistent with him this season. But overall, man, you see the traits. I know he got the short arms, that grew, in a couple of months. You can see it, man. You can see the potential, how he moves his feet, how he gets out of there from his stance. Good base and in the run game as well. So he's a complete football player. Not surprised he went number 4 that early in the draft. And then Josh Connolly. I didn't have him as high coming into the season. I saw some things on tape he needed to clean up as far as power, handling power, his base, losing balance sometimes. But going forward and the speed that Connolly has to get to the second level he's an athlete playing the tackle position. So if they could just mold him up, and I don't think he has to come in right away for the Commanders. They have a couple of tackles on that roster already. But year 2, year 3, I can see Conley being type of like a Pro Bowl type player for that Commanders football team.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent movement ability, but your point is well taken, Headley. There's a question about functional strength. If he does get the benefit of a year of development, I think that can serve him well in the long run. The Commanders clearly felt like, we couldn't pass him up, even if he isn't necessarily in the starting lineup as early as 2025. They thought his talent was too good to pass up. So that speaks to the tackle selection. Now, here's where things get interesting, right? Our very first mock draft of the 2024 cycle, again, as I mentioned, about 10 or 11 months ago, right? We got Cam Ward in the first round, okay? And if you're familiar with our content or curious about our content, as the weeks progressed, Juice was like, listen, man, it's Cam, bro. It's Cam. Cam is the one. You know what I'm saying? And of course, Cam Ward goes first overall to the Titans. Carson Beck struggled. The Georgia Bulldogs offense struggled. He dealt with the injury. He actually does not enter the draft. I think that was a wise decision. I think by the time we got to the end of the season, we were thinking more day 3-ish in terms of the tape, right? Now, some of that was solely on his shoulders, and then some of it was, the offensive line underachieved. The receivers did not catch the football on a consistent basis. Life after Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers was rough. It was rough. You know what I mean? So I think Carson Beck made the right decision. Of course, we have the Titans taking a quarterback. They ultimately take Cam Ward, right? So he makes the right decision. He transfers to Miami. We're going to talk about him a little bit more later. So I don't want to spend a lot of time there. Obviously, Carson Beck didn't enter the draft this year. Shedeur Sanders, bro. We talked about it ad nauseum throughout the actual draft when we were doing the live streams, and then post-draft. He doesn't go first round. He doesn't go second round. He doesn't go day 2. He ends up in the 5th round in a crowded Cleveland Browns quarterback room. I think we still maintain, at least from our perspective, you want to make the argument for Jackson Dart, who you won't find in the first round of this draft. I don't think. I'll have to double check. Maybe he did. Maybe he found his way in the 20s. But in our minds, we thought Shedeur, and I think we are still within that particular mind frame here, collective, I'm speaking for everyone, that Shedeur should have been selected in the first round of this draft. So as things played out, we got more and more information. Let's just talk about the football for a second. Did those quarterback needy teams make a mistake here? I'm passing up Shedeur. I mean, time will tell, but in your minds, as things stand right now, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, bro. It was quarterback 2. What do you mean? Yeah.
Big mistake, bro. That's 100%. Easy, bro. It's an easy question, man.
Hey, we haven't done a show in about 6 weeks, so I'm throwing some softballs out there.
You gotta smash them, man.
Now, again, I'd be remiss not to point out that, of course, we nailed the quarterback for the Titans. We nailed it for the Giants as well. Not necessarily the player, but the position, right? So, yeah. I think different set of circumstances as it relates to perhaps the interview process, the pre-draft process. Shedeur could very well be a Giant. He very well could have been a Giant from that regard. So it's interesting. It's interesting to kind of see how it all played out over the course of the last year or so. I believe the Raiders did take a quarterback later in the draft, more of a developmental prospect. Of course, they traded for Geno Smith. They prioritized Ashton Jeanty. That's who they prioritized. Yeah. In this particular draft. So real quick, definitely a departure there. Go ahead.
Before you get to Ashton Jeanty and the Raiders, real quick, I just want to put this out there. So the word on the street obviously is that the Shedeur went into the Giants and it didn't go well. And if it went how we understand it to go, I don't blame them for not drafting him in that scenario. I don't, because you rub people the wrong way or you see something you don't
relationships
like.
Matter. Relationships
it's
matter,
over, bro. Like
at the end
that's
of the day.
You know what I'm saying? Yep. Like, yeah. So but that's the only club that I'm gonna give a pass to. Everybody else, I hope he lights y'all up, bro. Okay? Hope he light everybody up. Except for the Bucks. Gotta chill with the Bucks.
Lead the Bucks out of it.
Yeah, lead the Bucks out of it. We ain't got nothing to do with that, bro. Okay.
I mentioned Ashton Jeanty to the Raiders. I know we were probably on that train of, running backs too early. Ashton Jeanty, obviously, well-deserved, ends up being a top 7 pick, top 8 pick. Will Johnson and Benjamin Morrison are the next two selections. So Will Johnson actually ends up with the Cardinals, right?
Nice.
Interestingly enough, he actually ends up in Arizona. We all kind of had that thought process that they needed that bigger boundary corner to match up. They have a number of good quality young corners who can play inside or whatever the case may be, but looking for a bit more size on the boundary. The injury ultimately drops him out of the first round. He goes day 2 in the second round to the Cardinals, but we got that one matched up right. The Vikings, another team that we thought was pretty defensive back needy because of the defense that Brian Flores deploys, right? He wants to be aggressive. He wants to play press man coverage. Benjamin Morrison, again, right? You look at the film. I don't even know. I don't even think it's a debate. Best man coverage skills in the class. He deals with the labrum injury, which obviously drives down his stock. And I think it's fool's gold for the Bucks. If I'm not mistaken, it wasn't Derek Harmon. Who did? It was Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson actually was the Vikings draft selection in the first round. And I think it was a good pick. I think it was a quality pick, really solidifying the interior of that offensive line. Jackson actually, acquitted himself fairly well at offensive tackle once Josh Simmons went down to injury. And then Helly, remind me, for Arizona, it was a boy from Ole Miss, right? Arizona
Walter Nolan.
First round.
Walter Nolan.
Nolan. They worked front to back. They worked front to back. I do believe they added another defensive back. Well, yeah, I just mentioned that, Will Johnson. But they started the draft with Walter Nolan in the teens. So we nailed the Will Johnson selection. Certainly, at least in our minds, I don't remember off the top of my head everyone, because the Vikings only had a handful of selections, but they prioritized the offensive line, which is understandable, particularly with a guy like Benjamin Morrison dealing with that labrum injury. Abdul Carter rounds out the top 10. And of course, I don't think it took us long to come to terms with the fact that he was going much earlier than 10, right? I think by the time we did our second mock draft for the cycle, he was in the top 5. So Carter would have looked phenomenal in that Saints uniform. The Saints obviously needed a facelift at every area of their roster, offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. But of course, Carter was not available at that time. We mentioned it earlier. They ended up with Kelvin Banks, whom I think is a good selection in terms of adding him to Fuaga and trying to solidify that offensive line. T-Mac to Seattle. So, of course, Seattle, they trade away DK Metcalf, right? JSN obviously takes a significant step. They bring in Cooper Kupp. Who's that third guy?
Receiver.
MVS. So I want to give my fellow alum the respect he deserves, right? MVS is a decent veteran, but he's not the answer. T-Mac clearly wasn't available during the actual 2025 NFL draft. He goes to Carolina. And I'm not mad at it, considering the rest of the Panthers draft, how they approached it. But I think that is a question mark. Now, ultimately, Seattle selects Gray Zabel in the first round, and then they get your guy in Manawari, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit later. So that worked out really well. For Seattle. If you're not going to necessarily go and get that quote unquote number one, because you obviously have a belief in JSN, Cooper Kupp, you think still has something in the tank here. You're kind of reconfiguring your offense a bit here, but you got to get the offensive line situated. Certainly understand Gray Zabel. And again, at this point last year, right, the first mock draft of the cycle, Zabel wasn't quite on our radar yet, admittedly, right? Not unlike Armand Membo, you know what I mean? And you know what? I go back to Membo. I think the first guy, Helly, you definitely brought Zabel to our attention. The first guy to actually mention Membo was D-Kit. D-Kit actually was the one who had identified Membo fairly early. All right. Malachi Starks. I don't want to take too much time on this one, right? I knew it since he stepped on campus, right? Despite the fact that there's kind of the depreciation of the safety position, he's just too good of a football player. Had hoped that the Colts get him. They didn't. And somehow, some way, it happened again. Baltimore gets one of the best football players, despite relatively deep playoff run. So it just worked out perfectly. They get Malachi Starks. They got one of the best, if not the best, safety duos in the league, despite the fact that Starks hasn't played it down yet. You just think about the talent of Kyle Hamilton combined with Malachi Starks. So really exciting stuff. Harold Perkins Jr., Drew.
What happened to that boy?
What happened to that boy, man?
Well, he got injured.
He got
injured. And you know, we wanted him to be I think the debate was we wanted to see him more as a pass rusher, but we weren't sure if he could actually be that guy. To be
hold up because of the size. The size. Yeah.
And we're gonna talk about this. I don't know today, but
no, we are.
We got a brother.
We are. We're gonna talk about it. We are.
He got a brother, bro.
And
it's very, very interesting, bro. That's what I'm gonna say. Bro.
Yeah, I think LSU kind of did him a disservice early on, dropping him back in coverage. I understand. Okay, he might not hold up at edge, you know, down in and down out in the run game, but that's when you kind of put him as an off-ball linebacker, line him up in the AB gap, still have him attacking, still have him coming after the quarterback, like a lot of these teams are doing now with their most athletic defender. But for some reason, they wanted him 5-10 yards down the field in coverage. Hopefully, he comes back this year. They utilize him correctly off the injury, and him and his brother ball out and be early picks in next year's draft.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate, right? You know, as you can see in our way too early mock draft for 2025, Perkins was the first off-ball linebacker because we're considering Abdul Carter in this instance to be an edge, right? Abdul Carter has kind of that similar skill set where they can thrive off ball. They're talented enough, have the requisite instincts and athleticism to play off ball in space, but also accomplished pass rushers in their own right. Now, Carter's frame obviously suggests that he can play edge with more consistency. Although I don't know if you want to eliminate his superpowers. I think it's a matter of coaching. I think it's a matter of how you deploy these guys, right, to get the most out of them, particularly in the case of Perkins, who's more of a tweener, right? He's on the lighter side. His frame is that of truly of an off-ball linebacker. So yes, you don't want to necessarily line him up at edge because, you know, good football teams are just going to run right at him. And it isn't to say that he's not a good run defender, but to try to hold up against 330-pound tackles and pulling guards over and over and over again is probably not the best way to deploy him. But I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to him being healthy, right? He was a sensational player, regardless of what they asked for him. While healthy, even though, as you mentioned, Drew, they did him a bit of a disservice, right? And he kind of got lost in the shuffle. The injury really obviously made the right decision. Go back to school and get yourself right. You know what I mean? But to me, he's on the short list in terms of the best players in the country when he's right. So looking forward to it. And I think there's a common thread among some LSU prospects that we could see in the 2026 class of having something to prove, right? Whether it be injury or lack of performance and coaching kind of, compounding issues or whatever the case may be. That's going to be a program, I think, obviously lots of talent. It's a hotbed for talent, but there's a lot of question marks coming out of LSU. As I see the name peeking, my guy who also dealt with injury, and it torpedoed his draft stock. It really did torpedo his draft stock in Deon Walker. I thought Deon Walker going into the 2024 season was just going to cement himself as perhaps the best down lineman in this draft, right? Mm-hmm. You notice we haven't talked about Mason Graham just yet. There he is at 15. So I actually had Walker, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, I had Walker above Mason Graham. It wasn't a huge disparity, but I thought Walker's ceiling might be higher than that of Mason Graham. Mason Graham being a safer prospect. Of course, we got Mason Graham going to the Chargers there. To put a bow on the Deon Walker conversation, I mentioned dealt with a back injury. There was some concerns about effort and his leverage, his ability to hold up against the run. I think that all led to him falling out of the first couple of days, right? But I think if he can maintain a certain level of health, I think he could be a difference maker. I still maintain that he can be a difference maker. The Steelers, again, we're talking about fit and what the team is trying to accomplish. The Steelers went with Derek Harmon in the first round this year. We thought they would be in the market for a Shedeur Sanders, but we also recognize that Cam Hayward is longer in the twos. You got Keanu Benton doing his thing at the nose. You needed another down lineman in that 34 defense, right? And Derek Harmon actually was the guy. Now, he is a player that I don't think we were quite on as early as some of these other guys.
Nobody was, bro. He showcased, bro. Bro. Lit it up. Couldn't miss him.
Definitely. I mentioned Mason Graham. Of course, he goes 10 picks earlier. We thought in this case that, you know, that Michigan connection might be in order with Harbaugh. You know what I'm saying? Making that move. Jabbar Muhammad. Okay, again, Jags went corner. We saw the need there. We recognized that need. It was a player that when you just look at the film, especially coming off of what the Washington Huskies did, you know, led by Penix and that trio of receivers on the offensive side of the ball, frankly, we thought Muhammad should have declared. He should have declared season ago. He didn't. He goes to Oregon. I think he was trying to win a championship. I think that meant something to him. It's not that he didn't play well, but he did not test well. He did not test well. It was already a smaller defensive back, tested as a below average, poor athlete in certain instances and certain metrics. And he falls completely out of the draft, man. Falls completely out of the draft. Now, I'm still a big proponent of the film, right? I think ultimately he finds his way onto a team and he becomes a contributor. I think he's that good. But it is a projection, right? And the measurables, these NFL organizations, the measurables matter. The measurables ultimately matter. So again, I'm gonna leave it there. Just want to point out once again that we got the position right. Clearly not the player in this instance. Emory Jones is another one. Emory Jones is another one who just did not play well, right? Did not play well. I think he ended up with Baltimore, went maybe in the third. Thrust into action early as a true freshman, held up very well first couple of seasons. But this past year, it just kind of fell apart. It just didn't look good, right? Mississippi Bradsky obviously, you know, destroyed his stance, and we actually asked him about that. If I recall, Drew, when in Mobile, we kind of asked him about it, and he wasn't belligerent or anything, but he was a little defensive. He was a little defensive about the question, right? You know what I'm saying? In terms of his stance, what have you. I think the Ravens see something in him. I think they want to be a little bit more athletic. He certainly can add that, but he needs some polishing and clearly didn't play to the level of a first rounder. Next up is a pair of players that did not go in the first round. Isaiah Thomas actually ends up with the Jets, who we have here at 19. And Isaiah Bond, the film certainly didn't warrant a first round selection. And in fact, I think Isaiah Bond would be a good candidate for our next segment in terms of players having something to prove entering this season for the 2026 draft cycle. The off the field stuff then became part of the conversation with respect to Isaiah Bond. So I thought he was in a fairly decent situation in terms of Sark and Texas. The quarterback play wasn't great, but Matthew Golden gets the job done, right? He does his thing. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's one of those things where I think Bond, despite the transfer, it didn't materialize. And then, of course, he's got to take some culpability in that as well. James Pierce to the Bears. We've been looking for that edge opposite Montez Sweat, right? We've been really trying to get that in place. He is a first-round pick, goes to Atlanta, as does another player we're going to talk about in just a second. But we had Michael going to the Falcons here, right? Headley, again, trying to get that pass rush. And that was the question. With respect to Michael was, has he demonstrated enough, right? And in your mind, Headley, what do you think? Has Michael demonstrated enough to warrant the 11th overall pick, I believe? He went to the Niners. The Niners really wanted to double down on their defensive line. So what do you think about Michael's prospects at the NFL level?
Yeah, but the first question, has he done enough to warrant that top, was it top 10 pick or number 11 pick?
Top 10 or 11. Yeah,
11 to the 49ers. No, the answer is no, man. The tape is, you know, he did get hurt last year, so, you know, people give him a pass on that, but we still haven't seen the explosiveness, the consistency to get after the quarterback. I like what he does in the run game. I think that was part of the reason the 49ers got him. He's a big physical guy up front that can help you in the run game. But as far as getting after the quarterback, getting those sacks, I don't think he's a top 11 pick. But like I said, for the second question, the prospects going forward, he's going to be physical. He's going to help in the run game. And hopefully they can develop him with Nick Bosa behind Nick Bosa to get after the passer as well. I think he's still a first-round talent, but just not number 11. I thought it was a little too high.
I tend to agree with you. I'm going to back up a little bit here to the James Pierce selection, Drew, and get your thoughts on him. Now, the Falcons, they double-dipped. They actually took Jalen Walker prior to James Pierce, but with James Pierce, and I think James Pierce kind of went in the area that we anticipated, right? A lot of people at this point of last year, the draft cycle, had James Pierce perhaps the top prospect in the class.
Yeah, it was Pierce and Michael Williams. They were like top
Pierce and Michael Williams
players in this class, and we had them in the 20s.
And we had him in the 20s. We weren't quite as high on them. Now, Pierce, I think he certainly took a step forward in terms of his run defense, his functional strength, and he had the counting numbers from a sacks and hurries perspective. But it just seemed like the snap-to-snap, game-to-game consistency wasn't there. I think he got off to a bit of a slow start. I'm just wanting more from him. He's got the tools, the length, the burst, the get off, the quickness. He certainly has a tool, and it's a projection-based business here. So it certainly makes sense why he went in the first round. But I think we were fairly well aligned with the NFL as it relates to where in the first round he should be going. I didn't think any earlier than the 20s was really appropriate for James Pierce. So that kind of worked itself out as well. The Dolphins at 22, we had them taking Tyleik Williams. They go Kenneth Grant. So clearly you see the thought process there. Tyleik Williams actually went very early in the second round. I think was he the first pick of the second round? No.
Tyleik went first round, didn't he?
Tyleik ended up in the first round?
Yeah.
Let me see.
I believe so.
Yeah, he went to the Lions.
Yeah.
Man, I'm not even giving us enough credit, bro. I'm not even giving us enough credit. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing
CPGM,
it.
CPGM hating CPGM, bro. I understand. It's okay.
Hating on CPGM, bro. Right? So there you have it, right? They ultimately went with Kenneth Grant. They like the upside there. I think we collectively felt like Tyleik was the better player. I think Tyleik has demonstrated that he's the better player. Perhaps not the same type of lofty upside that you might see with a Kenneth Grant, but more consistency from him. He got a little lost in all that talent they had on Ohio State. He's doing a lot of the dirty work up front, but really good player. Again, aligned with the position, just not necessarily the team there. At 23, I don't even want to talk about this one, bro. I don't even want to talk about it.
So I got a question, bro, because I saw that name, bro, and I'm looking at the list, and I'm like, what's the worst pick we made so far?
I got two.
Right?
Emory Jones, and then this guy here.
I didn't even acknowledge the Emory Jones one, bro. The Porter one is bad, bro.
It's bad. It's real bad, bro. It's real bad. I think it's a byproduct of a couple of things, right? I think on the one hand, I don't know that we at this point had done enough work on the corners. I'm gonna call a spade, right? I don't think we did enough work. Right, that sounds like a cop out, but I really do think that's the reality, and it's not a cop out because we got to do better, right? But so Miami's defense was terrible. We've discussed this, right? It was awful. It was painful to watch at times. He was the one player I thought, right, based on how he had played the previous year, that you could count on, bro. This man was getting cooked by everybody. It didn't matter, bro. Slot. Boundary, there was a lack of physicality, there was no plays being made on the ball. Like it was just bad. And when you talk about torpedoing your stock, this wasn't a matter of poor testing. This wasn't a matter of the pre-draft process. I'm not doing well in the interviews, whatever the case may be. This was just bad film. This was just purely bad film throughout the 2024 campaign. And I agree, it's our biggest miss. It's our biggest miss here, right? I think it's a bigger miss than the Jabbar Muhammad, because Jabbar, his tape still holds up, right? To me, in my mind, his tape still holds up. So yeah, I agree with you, Drew. This one was egregious,
bro. If Muhammad was average, bro, where would he have gone? You know what I'm saying, in terms of the testing. But Porter,
Right.
it's almost like he thought he arrived at something, bro. I'm here, bro. I already made it.
know.
You know what I'm saying? I'm just
I don't
trying to
know
make
what
it through the
Buddy was
season,
on.
bro. But I mean, and here's the crazy part, bro. Anytime you're on a bad defense, bro, just do it. Just do enough, bro. You're a star, bro. You know what I'm saying? And he was one of the worst on the team. That's crazy, bro.
Yeah. That's the thing about it, right? Coming off the 2023 campaign, you're thinking, okay, you know, maybe the first round's a bit too ambitious, but day two, he could certainly make a case for, you know, the second round, you know, third round turn, right? But it just got from bad to worse. It got bad, and you're expecting your seniors, you're expecting your veterans, right, to galvanize, to rally the troops, to raise their level of play, to lead by example, and it just never happened, bro. It never happened. He was a liability, like most of the Canes defenders, and this is coming from a Canes fan. It was bad. He played himself not just out of the first round, but, you know, out of being drafted effectively.
Yo, you know, this whole time we were talking about Porter, I'm thinking it's the quarter from Iowa State.
No,
And
not that Porter.
Yeah, I know.
Not that one.
So yeah, this is the worst pick by far, man. It's Daryl Porter. That's who we drafted in the first round.
That's who we had, bro.
Man.
That's who we had, bro.
That's crazy.
I was high on
No.
I like this tape too.
Even Headley, even Headley liked this tape.
Mhm.
It wasn't a matter of his 23 tape was encouraging, bro. It was, and based on who we had watched to that point, right? It was like, okay, you know, we could maybe we can make a case, bruh. No. 2024.
Yeah, bro. The entire season.
No.
I don't think you. You know what I'm saying?
No.
It was bad, bro.
No, it was bad all the way through. It was bad all the way through. Definitely. All right. Ashton Gelati, a player that Kansas City nabbed in the third round.
Of course they did.
We saw his star diminish a little bit. But really good football player. As far as the Texans are concerned, they traded out of the first round. They ultimately grabbed a receiver. They didn't like what they had. As far as Stephon Diggs, they moved off of that. Tank Dell injury. So they wanted to prioritize weaponry there for CJ Stroud. We were convinced. We were convinced that the Eagles would continue to bolster the edge, right? Milton Williams, you know, Josh Sweat. They're going to go edge, right? So Drew's got Princely, you know, and when you talk about pass rush aptitude, first step quickness, explosiveness, he checks the boxes there. I think there's some concerns about his approach. I heard some evaluators mentioning that, you know, he's doing too much spinning, but I thought Princely was actually just working on certain things. He was trying to beta test certain pass rush combinations and moves, and I don't know that it necessarily served him all that well ultimately in terms of where he went in the draft. He didn't fall off the face of the earth. He went very early in the third, and I think did he manage to end up in Carolina as well? Did they get Scorton and Princely?
I believe so. I know they doubled up.
Yeah. You see the name Nick Scorton there. I thought he certainly would be a first round pick as well. He goes in the second to Carolina. I actually like that quite a bit for Carolina, right? As far as getting that defense right. Tez Johnson, Headley, your guy.
Well, big fan of Tez, but you know, when you weigh what was it, 140? Easy 147? When you weigh,
I think it was like 156.
156?
Yeah, 156.
Like
come on.
I shorted him a little bit, but when you weigh 156, man, ain't no way you get into the first round. So I'm still a big fan of his. He ended up with you guys, right, Drew? He's with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the sixth round. So I still like his tape. I still like his separation ability. But he didn't test well either. He's one of those other guys that came in smaller, like a guy we spoke about before, and still didn't test well. So yeah, that was a fall to the sixth round. But he's a talent though. Just like my boy Jimmy Horn. I think both of those guys are two late round receivers that could get their way on the field earlier than we think.
And they're gonna outplay their draft position for sure.
I know it's a deep receiving room there in Tampa Bay. I think Horn will have to work his way up the depth chart a little bit, but I really do like the combination of him and Bryce Young potentially, right? Flanked by McMillan and XL, assuming he can catch the football. I think that's dangerous. I think that's a dangerous young crew there to develop with. I did the Horton Jr. and Ricky White selections, Mississippi Brasky. Those are good picks, all things considered, right? All things considered, I think those were some good selections there in the later rounds for sure. Seattle did a good job. Seattle did a really good job. We got Tyler Booker, who actually went to Dallas, I believe, 14th overall. We had maintained, and we continue to maintain that the Bengals needed to protect Joe Burrow. I know they got a lot of roster attrition on the defensive side of the ball. They went high risk, high reward in terms of their first overall pick with Stewart out of Texas A&M, right? No significant production, but obviously lots of tools, lots of ability. Some of that is a byproduct of how he was deployed at A&M. So granted, hopefully he's given the opportunity to get after it. We had a chance to speak to him, and he said, listen, I didn't really get the opportunity to line up in this wide nine. I love it. I don't want to go back. I don't want to do 4-eye no more. Let me get upfield. Let me get after the passer. So that, I believe, is what the Bengals are counting on, but maintain that they really needed to address interior the offensive line. They did a little bit later, but I think a Tyler Booker type whom they wouldn't have had an opportunity to select in this draft, but even Donovan Jackson, Gray Zabel, I think would have been slam dunk picks for the Bengals in the first round. Josh Simmons. We had Josh Simmons here to the Lions, maybe thinking Decker on the move, right? Simmons, I think before he got hurt.
I think he was tackle 1 before he got hurt.
Yeah. That's where I was getting. That's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
I think his arrow was pointed directly up for you guys, right? Arguably the top tackle in the class, and I think all things played out the way we, had he been healthy, we could definitely be having that conversation in terms of him or Will Campbell being the first tackle off the board. He ultimately lands with the Chiefs. And I mentioned it in our recap of the AFC teams, their drafts of the 2025 class. The Chiefs, they're going right back to the Super Bowl, bro. They're going right back. They're going right back again, bro. They reloaded, bro. They are reloaded. And that offensive line, ultimately turned out to be an Achilles heel for them. It's happened before. It happened once again. We always talk about it here at Couch Potato General Managers. The most important position group is the offensive line. They had guys playing out of position, Tooney trying to fill in, and the left tackle's been an issue. If this guy's healthy, bruh, I can't see it any other way. I can't see it any other way. I think the Chiefs go right back and represent the AFC once again in the Super Bowl this upcoming year. The next name is probably my most favorite. You can see Kenneth Grant. Of course, he went first round. The Chiefs did make a concerted effort to bolster their defensive line. We talked about Ashton Gelati. I believe they picked up our guy from Tennessee as well, the 3-tech.
Omar Norman Lott.
Norman Lott. So you could see the thought process there as it relates to Kenneth Grant, right? The interior defensive line or down lineman, adding some teeth to that. But Jalen Walker, bro. Headley, I got to give it to you one more time, bro. It was during this time frame last year, summer scouting. It was during summer scouting. Headley said Jalen Walker. Kept on saying that name. He said, that's the one. He's the one. Right? Whatever you think about those edge rushers of the past or recent past, whatever the case may be, Walker's right in that same vein, perhaps even better. Now, I think part of the discrepancy we have is the fact that there's a lot of players getting run at Georgia, right? And then, of course, Walker was playing off the ball a little bit, whatever the case may be. But when given the opportunity to affect the passer, we saw that game. We saw what he did to the first overall pick in our way too early mock draft when he was faced up in one-on-one situations with Banks. I think this was our best get. I think we were the earliest on Jalen Walker. Of course, we didn't have him quite as high at this point. Now, fast forward 2 months later, he was in the top 15, right? And of course, he goes 15th overall, if I'm not mistaken, Headley, to your Falcons, right? Worked out perfectly for you there. But I maintain we were the earliest on Jalen Walker here at Couch Potato General Manager. Landon Jackson, again, one of those players, kind of like Ashton Gelati, that saw his star diminish a little bit. I'm still intrigued. I like the landing spot with Sean McDermott in Buffalo, right? But as we look at it through the prism of the San Francisco 49ers, who clearly dealt with a lot of injuries. They weren't a good football team this past season, right? We had them perhaps back into the Super Bowl. They didn't make it, not nowhere close to that. But you mentioned it earlier, Headley, they took Michael Williams. They took an edge. We haven't taken an edge here. So I think when you think of it in its totality, that there were a handful of misses, a couple egregious ones, right? But for the most part, it may not necessarily be the corresponding player, but generally speaking, it was the position. It was the need that we were able to identify and associate with the players that were selected in the first round. So this was a good exercise. I enjoyed this. You know, and I'm really interested. I'm really interested. Stick around because we're gonna do our very first mock draft for the 2026 cycle at the end of this show, right?
That's before Summer Scout. We're going before Summer Scout.
It's before Summer Scouting this time. So we're gonna really challenge ourselves this time around and see what it looks like. All right.